Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 41 of Buha's Block. I just got back from San Francisco, where I attended the Lakers' first two Summer League games in the California Classic, heading to Las Vegas in a couple days for Summer League out there. And before I do so, I wanted to take stock of the Lakers roster, because that has been the topic du jour over the last couple of weeks, has been the Lakers roster building and the inactivity in both free agency and the trade market. So as we hit this weird pocket of the schedule where we're a week into free agency, a lot of the major moves have already happened, and the Lakers have a couple of days off here as well. I wanted to just assess the roster, look at who's on the roster, the Lakers cap situation, the potential depth chart, and what the holes and needs on the roster still are as we enter the second phase, second wave of the offseason. So before we get started, I just wanted to quickly thank you all for all of the support, for watching and listening. We're almost at 15K subscribers on YouTube. So if you are watching and you have not subscribed, please consider subscribing. I've been delivering 2 episodes a week, as well as reactions and reporting on breaking news with the team. So again, for those watching on YouTube, for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, your podcast platform of choice, I appreciate the support. I appreciate the subscribes, the follows, the downloads. It really means a lot. And I just want to say thank you guys. With that said, let's take a look at the Lakers roster and their cap situation. I have it here on Spotrac. For those watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see the Lakers salary sheet. For those listening, you're not going to be able to see it, but it's just basically all the players on the Lakers roster, the 15 players plus the 3 two-way guys. Then you see the position, age, cap hit percentage, base salary, incentives, likely and unlikely, and a trade bonus. Not much to take away from this. This is just a look at the Lakers salary sheet. They're only $45,000 under the second apron, and that's why LeBron James had to take such a steep pay cut. Originally, based on the projections, they were supposed to be over $1 million under the second apron. I'm honestly not quite sure what changed, but Spotrac has them at $45,000 under the second apron. ESPN's Bobby Marks has them at $45,000 under the second apron. So we are going with that. The Lakers are $45,000 under the second apron, which means they are above the first apron. There are certain restrictions with that, including not being able to take back more salary in a trade than you send out, not being able to acquire a player in a sign-in trade. If they do that, they will be hard capped at the first apron, which means they would have to shed about $11 million in salary to get back under the first apron. So this is where things stand. Full roster just under the second apron. And that brings us to the tentative depth chart. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the depth chart here. If you are listening, you can't see it, but I will break it down in a second. I just wanted to lay out some caveats first. We will call this depth chart 1.0. I assume the Lakers will have a depth chart 2.0 at some point, be it in the coming days or the coming weeks. At least by the end of the offseason, I assume that this roster will look somewhat different, at least a little bit different, even if it's a minor move. As I've said before, I think the Lakers need to do a consolidation trade, most likely with Christian Wood and Cam Reddish, just because I think the back end of the roster has several guys who are not ready to contribute on a good playoff team. And that can become an issue if the Lakers suffer an injury or two like they did last season. And if you lose a Gabe Vincent and a Jared Vanderbilt again, all of a sudden you're potentially relying on a Jalen Hood-Schifino or a Bronny James or a Maxwell Lewis. And I'm not quite sure that those guys are ready to be rotation caliber players yet. So I think the Lakers need to shore up the back end of the rotation. I think they could use another 3-and-D type wing, at least one more player that's either a plus shooter or a plus defender on the perimeter. And then they can certainly use a center upgrade, a player that's better than Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood, specifically as a tough physical presence who can protect the rim, is a plus defender. I think both guys trend more toward the offensive end of the floor than the defensive end. And the Lakers just need a guy who, no one's going to replicate Anthony Davis's defensive impact, but can you tread water and not give up a layup line for 8 to 12, even 15 minutes a night during the regular season? And as of now, they do not have that player on this roster. So I think that is a weakness they need to address, as well as at least one more two-way wing. As for the specifics of the depth chart, again, for those who are not watching, I will quickly break it down. I have the starting lineup as D'Angelo Russell at point guard, Austin Reeves at shooting guard, Rui Hachimura at small forward, LeBron James at power forward, and Anthony Davis at center. The second string is Gabe Vincent at point guard, Max Christie at shooting guard, Dalton Knecht at small forward, Jared Vanderbilt at power forward, and Jackson Hayes at center. The third string is Jalen Hood-Schifino at point guard, Cam Reddish at shooting guard, Maxwell Lewis at small forward, no third string power forward, and then Christian Wood as the third string center. And then I have Bronny James as the fourth string shooting guard. And before you overreact and call me out, there are plenty of caveats with this depth chart. For example, you could swap in Jared Vanderbilt for Rui Hachimura as the starting small forward. It's a very divisive topic within the fan base. I lean more toward the Rui side of the conversation. I know that the Lakers entering last season had wanted Rui to be the starting small forward. Things did not go as planned in training camp, and in the preseason he ended up not starting and playing a minimal role until he eventually started in February, and the team took off, winning at a mid-50s pace and then playing their way into the number 7 seed, where ultimately they lost to the Nuggets in 5 games. But I think Rui is someone that the Lakers have heavily invested in with their contract. They've obviously invested in Vando as well, but I have found it interesting that when they've talked about the team, both privately and publicly, Jared Vanderbilt's name has often not come up and has not come up as frequently as Rui Hachimura. I mean, from a public perspective, there's been no mention of Jared Vanderbilt in any of these press conferences talking about the Lakers' young core. And then if you look at the ESPN reporting around the Dan Hurley situation, and then our reporting at The Athletic, the constant names that have come up are Austin Reeves, Max Christie, and Rui Hachimura, not Jared Vanderbilt, not D'Angelo Russell, and not Jalen Hood-Schifino, though it's worth noting that the Lakers did mention Jalen Hood-Schifino in, I believe it was JJ Redick's press conference. So, I don't want to read too much into that. And there's certainly a scenario in which Jared Vanderbilt starts over Rui Hachimura, especially if the Lakers end up keeping D'Angelo Russell into the season and start the season with a Russell-Reeves backcourt. You certainly need some additional perimeter size and athleticism and defense, and that's where Vando would check those boxes, though he comes with a certain level of spacing limitations, and I think the Lakers started to figure that out before his injury against the Celtics at the beginning of February. Just the context with that was he was still primarily coming off the bench. He was still in a relatively limited role. And I just think it's one thing to do that against bench units, and it's another thing to do that against starting units. And obviously with the starters, the bulk of the offense is going to be funneling through LeBron and AD and Austin and D'Lo. So Vando is going to be the clear-cut number 5 option. And I don't know if you want to allocate certain resources to trying to get him involved and trying to use the way that defenses guard him against him. I think there's a potential diminishing returns to that strategy if you're trying to figure out a way to feature the number 5 option. That's almost working into the defense's advantage. So you can make the argument for Vando to start. I believe that with the public messaging from the Lakers, the way that they have invested in Rui, and even looking at the trade market, it seemed like Rui has slightly more value than Vando, though it certainly depends on who you talk to, which team it is, what their roster needs are. But I would say in general, Rui seems to have a little bit more trade value than Vando, just because a lot of teams are really concerned with Vando's fit in a playoff setting and just the way that teams are going to guard him and the way that you can likely stick a center on him and just play off of him and have that guy cheat towards the paint. So I think from that perspective, there are definitely warts with both players, but I lean toward Rui starting. I think JJ Redick has talked about the importance of spacing at the intro press conference for Dalton Knecht and Bronny James. He said spacing is a premium in this league. And I took that as a bit of a pushback toward the potential DeMar DeRozan fit, because that was around the time when the DeMar DeRozan buzz was the loudest. And he made an unprompted comment about spacing and how important that is. So looking at the spacing, like Rui Hachimura is objectively the better offensive player, the better shooter. He's coming off a season in which he just shot 42.2% on 3.4 3-point attempts per game. So relatively like low medium volume, but 42.2% is no joke. That is a legit percentage. And if Rui can continue to be the fifth option in the starting lineup, we saw the results of how overwhelming that starting five can be. And the New Orleans game, where all five starters scored 20 plus points, becoming the first starting lineup to do that since 1993. So the Lakers could go either way with Rui or Vando. Obviously, going back a couple seasons, Vando was the starter. That group did really well in the regular season, did not fare as well in the playoffs, but the Lakers have continued to grow with continuity and reps with the other four players in that lineup, D'Lo, Austin, LeBron, and AD. So maybe they can figure out a way to properly assimilate Jared Vanderbilt into the starting lineup. But I have to make a choice, and I'm picking Rui Hachimura here. And then looking at the rest of the rotation, because I have Gabe Vincent, Max Christie, and Dalton Connect in the rotation, that scales whichever one of Rui and Vando doesn't start from backup small forward to backup power forward. And I'm putting Rui at the small forward position just because the Lakers opted to use him more on the primary wing scorer. If you think about him guarding someone like a Kevin Durant or a Brandon Ingram, like that was the way that the Lakers preferred to use him and to save LeBron defensively and have him more as the low man and as the weak side help. But then moving to the second unit, I think whichever one comes off the bench will be playing more as the four, though the Lakers will obviously mix in LeBron and AD and maybe even some two big looks. And that brings me to the other important caveat here is that positions are flexible with a depth chart. Like Austin Reeves can slide down and play point guard in some lineups, and he could also slide up and play small forward in 3-guard lineups. Gabe Vincent and Jalen Hood-Schifino can play either guard position. Max Christie and Dalton Connect can play either shooting guard or small forward. Rui and Vando can play either small forward or power forward, or even center in super small lineups. LeBron can technically play 1 through 5, depending on how you want to categorize him. AD can play the 4 or the 5. Jackson and Christian are primarily going to be used at the 5, though technically in lineups with AD, you can argue that AD is still more of the 5 because of his defensive responsibility, protecting the rim, and as that backline defender. So I think like the one thing with this is anytime you make a depth chart, people say that player shouldn't be there, that player shouldn't be there. Like this is just a rough projection of where things are currently at. But again, looking at the back end of this depth chart with Jalen Hood-Schifino, Bronny James, and Maxwell Lewis in particular, I have some serious questions about their ability to step in, even in a regular season setting on like a random Tuesday night in Charlotte. Like, can they step in and be rotation contributors if there are injuries or foul trouble or whatever is going on? And I have some concerns about that. Like Jalen Hood-Schifino really struggled even in garbage time last season. Same could be said for Maxwell Lewis. Bronny James, the Lakers have already talked about, will likely be in the G League for most of the season and is still a raw prospect that's developing. So if you have 3 guys on your roster that you're not quite sure can even play in a regular season setting, like that limits your potential flexibility, that limits your depth. And that's before getting into outside of some of those highlights during the regular season. In general, Cam Reddish did not look like a rotation caliber player for a playoff team, and that's why he opted in to his vet minimum player option. And Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood both had their own stretches of not looking playable for a good playoff team. You start to look at it, and all of a sudden, you can make the case that the Lakers only have like 9 or 10 potentially reliable guys in the rotation. And that's fine because come playoff time, you only need 7 or 8. But that's also assuming Dalton Connect, who has really struggled in his first couple Summer League games, can be a rotation caliber guy. And again, as I said during the Summer League reaction show, I don't want to overreact to guys either way. Like the shooting, Dalton Connect is not going to be a 25% shooter. I'm not concerned. Like I think he's gotten a lot of good looks flying off screens and handoffs, and the way that the Lakers have used him off the ball has been creative. And even on the ball, I think he's been able to get downhill and play make a bit for his teammates. But in terms of getting downhill and finishing at the rim, he's missed several point blank shots. He got blocked once. He has been able to draw some fouls, which has been nice to see. But I think there's a chance that he's not ready for an outsized role, at least out of the gate. So all of this is to say that I think the Lakers still need to add a player or two, even if it is a vet minimum player or a player for the taxpayer MLE. Only 2 teams project to still have cap space. That's Utah. I think they're at about $37 million in cap space, and Detroit, who has about $21 million left in cap space. So if the Lakers can offer a Christian Wood and a Cam Reddish with a second round pick, or even a couple of second round picks, I think they could dump those guys to one of those 2 teams, or maybe a different team that doesn't have cap space but is under the luxury tax, has some measure of roster flexibility. And if they can do that, they open up a roster spot or 2, depending on how many guys they send out. And that allows them to sign potentially a Gary Trent Jr. or a Spencer Dinwiddie. Those are 2 names I've been talking about for about a week on here, also reported on The Athletic. And maybe they could add one of those guys that gives them, Gary Trent obviously isn't a 3-and-D wing, but he is an elite shooter. Also gives them some insurance of, if they do end up trading a D'Lo or a Gabe, you have another 6'4", 6'5" guard in the rotation, and no, he's not a point guard to replace them. You're going to have to figure that out in terms of more responsibility likely for Austin and to a lesser extent LeBron. But it at least gives you another rotation caliber player. And for $5 million, you can't really complain about a guy like Gary Trent Jr. like that. That's just a good value contract. So I think at this point, it's adding the best player available, because if you're looking at some of the minimum option centers, like I had liked Daniel Tice, he just signed with New Orleans. I don't think he quite fits everything the Lakers needed, but I think he would at least have given them a different look at center. And whether it's Trent or Spencer Dinwiddie or a different player, as long as the Lakers can add another rotation caliber player and improve the back end of this roster, I think at a minimum, it gives them some more insurance against foul trouble and injury during the regular season. Whereas now I think they're very susceptible to those things of, if a couple guys get into foul trouble or a couple guys get injured, all of a sudden you are relying on guys that you probably shouldn't be relying on. And that's how you end up being a 7 or 8 or 9 seed again. And that's to say nothing of making a trade. Ideally, they do a couple of moves where they clear a Cam Reddish and maybe a Christian Wood. They then open up a couple roster spots and sign a player to a vet minimum or taxpayer MLE contract. And then they also make a separate trade or two using either a first round pick or swap or whatever. And they make several upgrades to this rotation, whether it's a Jeremy Grant or a Kyle Kuzma or a Bruce Brown or a Cam Johnson or a Dorian Finney-Smith, one of those players for a first round pick. And I think for some of them, I'd certainly want to do a lottery protected first round pick or even a top 20 first round pick. Certainly none of them warrant 2 first round picks. So I think that is a bit too much for the Lakers to give up for any of those players. So I think the Lakers really need to make 2 to 3 moves to be at a true contender level and to be, in that conversation with OKC and Dallas and Denver and Minnesota. If they don't, I think they're more in that next pack with teams like Memphis and New Orleans and Phoenix. As I've said, I think the Lakers are the 5th best team in the West. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll be reflected in the regular season, because LeBron and AD have to stay healthy, and the top 8 or 9 of this rotation have to stay healthy, because again, if Gabe Vincent goes out, all of a sudden your backup point guard becomes Jalen Hood-Schifino or Bronny James. Or you're now playing Austin Reeves there, and then you have to play Dalton Connect more or Maxwell Lewis more, or maybe you're playing Jalen or Bronny at like the shooting guard and putting the ball in Austin's hands. So like there's a trickle down effect with potential injuries with this roster that does concern me in a regular season setting. But if we're talking about a play-in game or a potential first round matchup against some of these other teams in the West, maybe Memphis bounces back and is like a 2 or 3 seed and the Lakers are matched up with them, I still would favor the Lakers in a head-to-head series against them. And my optimism with the Lakers largely stems from, I still view LeBron James and Anthony Davis as arguably top 10 players. I have Anthony Davis in my top 10. I think LeBron is more borderline, somewhere in that like 8 to 12 range, but I think they're top 12 players at a minimum. And they're really the only duo you can say that about. I still have them above Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, Dame Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and even Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I think they're the best duo in the league in terms of their talent and their production. and just their individual ranking. Of course, Tatum and Brown won the championship. Jokic and Murray have outplayed LeBron and AD at times in those head-to-head matchups. And I also should have mentioned Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving as one of the best duos in the NBA. So there's certainly competition for that best duo distinction, but having 2 top 10 or 12 or even 2 top 15 players puts you at a certain level. And then you look at the success that the Lakers had after inserting Rui Hachimura into the starting lineup on February 3rd. They went 22-10, which was the 5th best record in the league, 4th best record in the West, only behind Denver, Dallas, and OKC. They had the 3rd best offense in the league over that span, only 22nd defense, and a large part of that was they were missing Jared Vanderbilt and Gabe Vincent, and you add those 2 guys in, and maybe the offensive rating drops down a little bit, but the defense gets better. And a 32-game sample size is not nothing. Like, it's not everything, but it's not nothing. And the Lakers won at a 56-win pace over that final 2 months of the season with Rui as the starter. And I don't expect them to win at a 56-win pace again, but a 56-win pace would put you near the top of the West, and we shall see. But right now, that is my current thought process with the Lakers and where they stand in the West. But in summation, the Lakers need to upgrade the back end of the roster and explore the trade market for a potential move this week or later in the month. But at a minimum, they need to salary dump before it's too late. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. As always, for those on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment and a like if you enjoyed this video. And for those on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back later in the week, most likely from Las Vegas at Summer League, but potentially before then. I will talk to you soon.